What do we do about homelessness? Homelessness is really houselessness, and houselessness is increasingly in America the product of the increasing cost of housing. And the fact that income, particularly minimum wage income, is not keeping up with it. There's an awful lot of working people who are houseless. And so, I think there's two levels of response that we need to have to this. The first level of response is one that I've talked about many times on this program, and I'm not going to belabor other than mentioning it in this little rant, which is that we need to do something about the commodification of housing. We have massive Wall Street hedge funds that are buying that have bought millions of homes across America. In some markets, they're buying as many as 50% of all houses on the market every year. And what they do is they take those houses basically out of circulation. They're no longer, being lived in by people who own them and therefore will sell them a couple of years down the road. The average American moves every 7 years. They're no longer in the housing market, these houses. They are now in the rental market. And then they jack up the rent because they control the marketplace. So that's number one. But number two is, what do you do with people who have already fallen through the cracks and are living in tents or sleeping under trees or whatever? What do you do with them? And there have been all these different debates about this or that or the other thing, and mostly we've just been putting up with tent cities. And summer is coming, and there's going to be a lot more of these tent cities all over America. I call them Reaganvilles, by the way. They used to call them Hoovervilles back in the 1930s. We should start a movement to call them Reaganvilles, because all of this is the consequence of Reagan's economic policies, all this homelessness. But I wanted to tell you what Portland has done. We have in Portland 4 little communities of tiny houses. You probably read about tiny houses. Portland has legalized the building of them in your backyard for, mothers-in-law and that kind of thing. But the essence of the essence of what they're doing is they're building these little tiny houses. They're really genuinely tiny. They're everything is in one room basically, and then they share a communal shower and toilet, and with privacy and everything. But the facilities are separate, and they put together 30 to 50 of them in an area that's about a city block, maybe 2 city blocks, and they have their own security. There's a full-time person there who's doing security and who's doing maintenance for these tiny houses. And but they have utilities. They've got water. They got electricity. They can cook. They can, they can sleep. Here's the amazing thing: we have started making these available to people now. A number of them are run by private groups. The Queer Affinity did one. A group out of Portland. They created one called Safe Rest Village last November. There are other ones. There's a BIPOC one. There's the one for just women. There's one called Multnomah Villages. There's I believe 4 or maybe 5 of these. Yeah, there's 5 of them. And this is where it gets amazing. More than 50% of the people, this is looking at 3 of Portland's Safe Rest Villages, the Queer Affinity, the BIPOC, and the Multnomah Villages, these 3. 50% of the people who were moved into these tiny homes are now living in stable housing, according to data from the county. Half of them. The other half have moved into other temporary shelter, inpatient treatment facilities, relatives or friends' homes, or back onto the street. In other words, these tiny houses are like, okay, you can have this for a certain period of time, like for a year, but after that, you've got to find a place to live. It's this transitional housing. And what's incredible is this 50% rate of people getting into permanent housing. The rate of people, Portland hired a California nonprofit to come in and work with people in the tent cities here in Portland. And, provide them with some services, medical services, intervene with regard to safety and things like that. But their main job was to try to get them out of those tent cities and into regular housing. Their success rate was 2%. 2% of homeless people moved into permanent housing. Of the people who were given housing, no questions asked, no fee, no charge, given housing in these tiny house communities, 50% have moved into permanent housing. Keep an eye on this program. I don't know of any other cities that are doing this. If you do, let me know. I mean, it's not to say there's not, but I just don't know of any. And but it's working here, and spread the word. It's in. If you want to read more about it, it's in today's Oregonian, our newspaper. Their website is OregonLive.com, and I believe it's one of the stories that is not behind the paywall. Meanwhile, homeless encampments all over the country are exploding. In Marin County, the average price of a home is $1.4 million. How can anybody how can the people who work at the McDonald's in Marin County, this is an entire county, how can the people who work at the McDonald's in Marin County live in Marin County when the average house price is $1.4 million? Thus, Marin County now has a homeless camp that is 2 miles long. 2 miles long. A mile is a long distance. It's even worse in Southern California, along San Vicente Boulevard in Beverly Grove. This is Dr. I'm quoting here from an article. Where is this article from? I'm not. I don't have the link. I'm sorry. But this quote is Dr. Kenneth Wright, a physician and surgeon, has been working out of an office in the neighborhood for 22 years. He says, quote, "For the last year and a half to 2 years, there's been encampments on both sides of my office building. Patients are afraid to come in. Many of these homeless people have psychiatric problems, drug problems, and they're screaming profanities at my patients. These unhoused people defecate in our planters. They defecate in the parking lot. It's gotten to the point now that I had to leave. My office staff is afraid. They're afraid to come to the office. They come in pairs." So, this is not a desirable situation, shall we say. And Americans are facing one of the toughest housing markets in years. There are, in some cities, as many as 20 prospective renters for every single apartment that goes on the market.